Bienvenidos, welcome Treasurer Rosie. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, great to be here.
Bienvenidos a todos, welcome. I hope you are hanging in there, staying positive and focusing on what you can control. Thank you for joining us for today's Cafecito con HACE. I hope you have your cafecito ready to go. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Patricia Mota, currently serving as President and CEO for HACE, a national organization that is positively impacting the workplace by cultivating the pipeline of talent and connecting to employers seeking to recruit, retain, and develop talent. It is my honor to introduce and welcome to everyone our 43rd U.S. Treasurer, Rosie Rios. Bienvenida.
Thank you so much, Patricia. I'm thrilled to be here and be part of this. This is great.
Wonderful. We are thrilled to have you. There's so much things that you have accomplished. I'm looking forward to get into. But before, we always ask our featured guests is how do you prefer your cafecito?
I brought mine with me. Of course, it's café con leche, of course, with a couple of Splenda. And this one in particular is pumpkin coffee. So getting into the season.
Just in time for the fall season, the pumpkin coffee. Thank you. And so I want to share a couple of things before I jump into the questions with our audience. And we will have some time towards the end to answer any questions. So please have your questions ready. Please like and share the videos with those that you think can definitely get some great insight. So Rosie, she is known for having put the efforts behind to place a portrait of a woman on front of our U.S. currency for the very first time in our nation's history. And even, prior to her appointment in the Treasury, which happened during the financial crisis around 2008, and she came in not only one of the most challenging times, she was also in investments and is also an advocate for women and girls, having recently launched Empowerment 2020, and other efforts supporting women, girls, and teachers' rights. And most recently, August 2020, you were named Women of the Century by USA Today. Rosie, can you tell us about, how your career trajectory and how you ended up at the U.S. Treasurer's office?
Yes, well, thank you. And thank you again for having me. So I was born and raised in the Bay Area, very kind of progressive and inclusive community. Went to school back east at Harvard and had my career path really follow mostly in three different areas, which was economic development, real estate, and investment management. And when I was in the fall of 2008, I was actually at the time managing director of investments for a $22 billion firm. Loved my life. My kids were 8 and 12, again, living in the Bay Area. And I got a call from a friend of mine. Maybe some folks know her, Aida Alvarez, who was the SBA administrator under Clinton. She's also here in the Bay Area. They were looking for finance professionals to come on board in the fall of 2008 should Obama win in November of 2008. They wanted folks to kind of be ready to move forward for day one when he were to take office in January 20th. So you might recall at the height of the financial crisis, Congress had just passed that legislation called the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. And so there were about 24 of us who came on board immediately after President Obama won and worked with the Bush administration to kind of craft the programs that would come from that legislation. So kind of hitting the ground running. And of those 24 people or so, I was told that 7 of us were recommended for a permanent appointment. I was one of those 7. So it was a hard decision. Like I said, my kids were very, very young. But I knew during that time of the transition team, when this concept came to me about women missing from our currency, it was a little surprising. And so I decided, even though it'd be hard to move from California to this foreign land of DC, I cobbled together my portfolio and made a proposal specifically for the responsibilities that I would have so I could work on this project. Only a couple people knew that I was working on it at the time. And so, kind of keeping it low key so we could kind of move forward without any kind of political influence. And so it was worthwhile. I would do it again all over again. I actually served for 8 years, the longest serving senior Treasury official at the time that I left. So it was, again, well worth it.
Well, thank you for your service, Rosie. And an interesting fact is that your signature is on 1.7 trillion of the 2 trillion U.S. currency that is out there. And as a fellow Latina, we should all be very proud. And I had to go find a currency that I have to find it. So for those of you, you see the signature right here.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? You're on the majority of the U.S. currency, your signature is on there.
It is great. Mostly because it's my kids' names too. So for them to come, again, kind of relocate and again, these are very, very hard decisions. I really wanted them to have an experience and really make this worthwhile for them. So when I look at that, when I still look at my signature, and yeah, it's out there everywhere, I think of my kids. I think that it was just something for them to also kind of be part of. So it's very, very worthwhile.
Yeah, and we're all very proud. So speaking of money, and tomorrow is Latina Equal Pay Day on October 29th. And on average, Latinas earn 55 cents to the dollar compared to their white male counterpart. And the other interesting fact, given that we've been experiencing a global pandemic, according to the Pew Research Center, is that Latinas, Hispanic women, have experienced the greatest decline in jobs at 21%. So given all of this, what advice do you have for us, not only as women, but also employers, to help close the gap and ensure that because the gap has even widened, right, with the last couple months as well, I would say.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part about all of that is, obviously there's almost 60 million Latinos in the U.S. and in all the conversations that have been happening recently, certainly during the pandemic, I just feel like we've been left behind even more so, and the numbers are staggering, absolutely staggering. Mm-hmm. So I'm very much supportive of hopefully moving forward with another stimulus legislation that will help those in need. What people don't realize is that we were in trouble even before the pandemic. A year ago, the Federal Reserve had released a report that said 40% of Americans could not easily afford a $400 emergency. We're way past $400. And so where are those conversations about the people who are really in need? So yes, women were disproportionately affected by the job losses from the pandemic. Latinas, my goodness, that's the case pretty much with every economic, social, and political statistic. We talk about women and the glass ceiling. For Latinas, it's a glass wall. We're not even in the room, much less in the building. And so for all of those out there, all of us out there who still kind of struggle with finding our voice, I think that is going to be the biggest challenge, is to get through all of this and really figure out what it means to have that collective voice. I mean, here we are in an election, and people are pointing to us, the 32 million eligible Latino voters in the U.S., and those numbers are only going to grow, right? Mm-hmm. So we've all seen the statistics. By 2045, our nation will become a majority minority. The numbers don't lie. So I say this all the time. If we're deliberate and strategic enough, we could influence every major indicator out there just based on the numbers. And so I would say finding your voice, finding your passion, knowing how to channel it, and really kind of thinking about this collective, right? We're stronger together, what that means. And this, by the way, this forum, ACE, is a great way for people to get connected, get started, and really think about what we have in common. It's kind of odd to think about. Here I am in California, and California was Mexico. And so mm-hmm. It's hard to think about us kind of being the newbies to the country. We're kind of already here. So it's this is frustrating for me. But I'm hoping, again, that we find this is a way to kind of reset that button and find that voice and that power that we already have. We just haven't used it.
Finding your voice and finding your power. I think And you talked about our collective power. That's our theme for the year at HACE. It's how are you leading yourself, whether it's developing yourself, seeking that mentor, asking questions. How are you leading in the workplace, speaking up, right, and advocating, but also being leaders in the communities and serving on nonprofits or organizations. But this year, right, we have an opportunity to voice, and that is by going to the polls and ensuring that you either have mailed in your ballot or you're going to the polls on election day. And yeah, by 2045, it would be a majority-minority country. So the time is now for, especially our Latinas, right, to ensure that we're advocating for ourselves, but also one another along the way as well. And Rosie, you are a perfect example of that. What advice do you have? We talked for women seeking to build wealth. I mean, you're a perfect example of that. What tips would you have?
Yeah, I think if you look at anyone who's really amassed wealth, or even, again, people who are able to retire comfortably, they all have something very specific in common, which is, for the most part, living modestly. So living within your means is a big part of it. You know, you've seen the stats. Warren Buffett's in the same house that he's been in over 40 years. Same thing with Carlos Slim. Mm-hmm. They've been in the same house, you know, for a while. And so again, their lifestyle has always been very, very, you know, very conscientious about what they spend. But it's also the way how they think about their investments, right? So investments doesn't necessarily mean you have to put all your spare money in the stock market or public or private securities. But it is the concept of saving and investing and compounding interest over time, right? It's like the big secret, right? It's not just interest on what you put on the bank, and it's that base amount that's always accumulating the interest. It's the aggregated amount that's accumulating interest. And so I would say, and it's really, really hard to do, but it's something I'm really focused on, especially to teach my children. My daughter's 20, my son is 24. Start today, putting aside what you can, putting it in areas, you know, it's so easy today to buy, you know, $20 worth of stock, a piece of stock. It's amazing when you hear all the numbers about how $700 billion has been amassed just during this pandemic. It's easier said than done to get into the game, especially today, especially with the ability to invest on these digital platforms. And again, it's that money that you put aside that will absolutely be your saving grace. Because again, that 40% of America who can't afford the $400 emergency, my goodness, we all have to have a rainy day. All of us have to have that rainy day, but it's really, really hard. And by the way, for Latinos, the wealth gap is an embarrassment. It is. And so, you know, you mentioned the 53 cents for Latina women, but that's for the pay gap. Mm-hmm. The wealth gap, it's about 32 cents for the median single white woman compared to what's owned by white men. For Black and Latinas, it's less than a penny. Less than a penny. So again, we're not even a rounding error when it comes to finding our power, finding our, you know, our value. Not really existing in that space. And so, you know, that needs to change. I really am hoping that as hard as it is to experience what's happening in 2020, you know, I know too many of my community members, too many folks who are having a really, really tough time. But as hard as it is, this is, I think, a huge opportunity for us as a community to really find that niche, find where we can infiltrate and find where we can leverage what we've built over this period and move forward, hopefully advance.
Well, I hope with that stat, right, it empowers us to take action and to get involved and to advocate to help closing not only the pay gap, but this astonishing wealth gap that
chasm. It's not a gap, it's a chasm. It's a chasm. And it's kind of a cliff, actually.
We need to flip that. You hear those tuning in, it's our responsibility. We have to take action to ensure that we're moving towards closing that. And so we have some questions coming in. Thank you, everyone. Please continue to share this video. My one last question, Rosie, before we open it up, and we have a couple great questions coming in. is what would you say is your I would say what would be your superpower? What would that be?
I love that question. So I think I actually have that superpower, which is I see the invisible. So being part of that experience in Treasury, where I realized in the Treasury Historical Resource Center that all the images that I came across of everything that's been produced on our financial products, so not just currency, but savings bonds, military payment certificates, the security page of your passport, which they still make in Treasury, all the images that I came across of women were not real women. They were allegorical figures like Lady Liberties. But every single image that I came across of a man was a real man, a founding father, a cabinet member, a president. And it dawned on me, if this is the way we institutionalize our history on all these products, why are we missing half the population? And so that was my wake-up call. That was my first awakening that really opened up this whole new vision of the world that I didn't see before. And I think we as a country have never seen before, obviously. And so I can see what's missing. I can see where women, and again, Latinas, where we're just not represented in everything that we see around us, whether it is classrooms, whether it is our history books, whether it is our statues, whether it is, how we're valued in every public way. We don't exist.
I think, and that's something this actually can be a good tip for all of us, because some of us may be in rooms where we're the only one represented. And so how are we leveraging or seeing that as a responsibility that we have to say, how are we going to increase a representation of it, whether it's more women, more Latinos, others in the rooms that we're in, and seeing the invisible, right? What you mentioned. I think that's super powerful. We have a question from our National Board Chair, Olga Camargo. She says, Rosie, why do you think employers think Latinas are expendable, that they can't be paid less?
I think it's a combination of factors. I do think there's a sense of value here in terms of how we're valued, and whether it's perceived or real. Yes, I think there is the assumption that somehow we aren't going to fight for what's ours, that we don't use that voice. I mean, again, look what's happened in 2020, and how have Latinos come together? I mean, this has been this amazing year of activism. But have we really used our voices in that way? And I'll give you my personal example where I know I had to learn the hard way, which was coming out of college. My first job that I had, I was a commercial property underwriter for General Reinsurance. Fabulous job. I was an analyst by trade. And I remember there were 12 of us who were hired nationwide from different regions. I represented this. I was going to work in the San Francisco office. And I remember we did our training for 4 months in Connecticut at the home office. And the 12 of us were together, we were talking, and one day, one of them, we're talking about kind of, we're all at the same level, and we're all gonna kind of advance at the same level, and et cetera. And so one person had shared they were actually making significantly more than the rest of us. So we were really surprised, thinking that we all came in at the same pay right out of college. So I immediately went to the HR person, didn't hesitate, and I said, I understand that John Doe is making X and we are all coming in at Y, and we're kind of wondering how that happened. And the answer was, ready? John Doe countered. It was that simple. It really was that simple. And again, you kind of learn the hard way, thinking, okay, that means I didn't have to take the offer that first came to me. And by the way, that is kind of my rule of thumbs always now moving forward. I never take the first offer, ever, ever, ever. There's always room. So again, that was kind of a painful lesson for me to learn up front. Again, my first job out of college. But I think we need to own our own worth. So there's always what people think, how people think we're valued. And there's how we think we're valued. And the two have to come together. And so again, it's a painful lesson to learn. And it's so hard to get out of your comfort zone. Because, we're usually humble, we don't do that, avoid controversy, blah, blah, blah. Oh, no.
Yeah, so it's a combination, advocating for self, but also ensuring, that the employer, that you're asking for the questions and just and not taking the first offer, right?
And knowing your worth, knowing what you bring to the table. Maybe that employer had no idea that you've been trained in XYZ. Maybe that employer had no idea that you have this great idea that you're coming with to the interview that could actually help you get that, help you negotiate. So,
I do want to ask this last question because I think this would be helpful from Sonia Del Real. What are some books you recommend for today's aspiring Latina, or books or any other resources, I would say?
Yeah, so I subscribe to all the kind of the financial periodicals, right? So Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. I live and breathe for those. But it is important also to kind of balance your life and read, you know, for the left and right side of your brain. So I mean, literally in this pandemic, I reread for the 100th time To Kill a Mockingbird, and my God, it lifted me up all over again because I think it represents the themes that are so important to me. How this young girl sees the world through a totally different lens, right? And so I'm very much invested these days about thinking about the next generation of leadership, millennials and post-millennials, and again, helping them find their voice. And so to read that book again made me think, my gosh, you know, it's so easy to influence a mind that is still kind of elastic versus, you know, us adults who are still kind of kicking and screaming. And so I invest everything. I feel like everything I've learned and still continue to learn, I've learned through my kids. So again, finding those opportunities to exercise both sides of your brain are so important. So so that's how I spend my time when I read.
Thank you. Thank you. Please join me, everyone, in thanking our U.S. Treasurer, Rosie Rios, for joining us today. All of you, stay safe, be well, y hasta la próxima.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.